Okay, so this is our last little bit about the plasma membrane chapter. So this will be sections 3 and 4 of chapter 5. So this is all the active transport mechanisms that we are going to discuss for this class. So let me share my screen with you guys, and we'll get this into slideshow mode. Okay, so here's the link for the section in your textbook, but now we're going to talk about active transport mechanisms. So remember, we talked a little bit about passive transport, which does not require energy. It just allows for the natural gradients of these things to move stuff across membranes. Okay, so the things that you guys are going to want to know for section 3 is how electrochemical gradients affect ions, and then can you distinguish between primary active transport and secondary active transport? Okay, so remember diffusion. So this is the movement of solutes going from a high concentration to a low concentration. This is the mechanism behind passive transport. Cells don't have to expend energy in order to do this movement. It just it happens naturally without any interference or energy input from the sun. Okay, and so here we can think about it going down a ramp, and so it's just there's no work that needs to happen. Okay, but sometimes cells need to maintain a high concentration of stuff in their cells, or they might even want to increase the concentration of a solute. So diffusion is saying that, okay, we have to take these red circles and roll them down the ramp to equal out our concentration. But the cell's like, no, 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 no. We want a high concentration of whatever this ion is. And so the cells are going to expend energy to push those red balls up our little proverbial slope here. Okay, so that's the huge difference between active and transport. That's the huge difference between active transport and passive transport. Active transport is energy inputted. Okay, so we're moving stuff against that concentration gradient. We're going from low concentration to high concentration. And usually this is the movement of small ions across the plasma membrane in order to create that electrochemical gradient. Okay, so before we get into all that, though, we need to actually define ATP, right? Because the movement of these ions across the plasma membrane depend on this molecule that we call ATP, and I've referred to it several times, but I haven't yet defined what it is. And so here's the chemical structure of ATP. Most of this you don't even care about. So here we've got some nitrogen stuff, and this structure kind of looks a little bit like a nucleotide of some DNA and some RNA, right? Interesting. We'll keep that in our back pocket for now. But let's talk about what acetylene triphosphate is. So here's our acetylene part. Cool, great. We don't really care about that right now. And look, there's a ribose molecule. That's cool, great. But this is where we care about. This is where, when we're talking about energy transport, we're talking about how ATP is the currency of the cell, and this is where the energy comes from to power our cellular processes. It's from this part of the molecule right here. So this is our triphosphate, our 3 phosphate groups. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. That's our triphosphate. What happens is that this bond right here can become hydrolyzed. We're going to add a water molecule and pop off one of these phosphate groups. And maybe we might even pop off 2, but usually it's just 1. And what that does is that makes our triphosphate into a diphosphate. So we are cycling between ATP, triphosphate, and ADP, diphosphate, based on how many phosphate groups are on this acetylene triphosphate or diphosphate. Okay, so this is the currency of life. So I like to think about biology in the terms of economics, and then this ATP is the money. And so when we get into metabolism, we're going to say, okay, how much ATP does this cellular process take, right? So just have, we don't really talk about, you know, we might say, okay, how much does this tuition cost, right? So we have a common way to measure the amount of resources that are needed to do a task. And in our class, those tasks are going to be metabolic processes. So all the time, we are cycling through ADP and ATP, creating it, breaking it, creating it, breaking it, creating it, breaking it. Because this is how the energy, when we pop off one of those phosphate groups, energy is released, and then we can take that adenine diphosphate and add a phosphate group to it by tacking on another phosphate group using the energy that we get from our food, and that turns it back into ATP. And we do this, I think I read somewhere that the amount of ATP to ADP that is processed in our bodies every day is equal to our body weight every single day. So this is going on all the time. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so this is how cellular processes are powered, right? This is our power plant. And really, so this is the electrochemical gradient that is created by the difference in charge and chemical concentrations across a membrane is where that energy is coming from. And this is the kind of, if you think of like the turbines, at a power plant or in a hydroelectric dam or something, this is where the magic happens. Okay, so active transport is carried out by pumps that move ions across the plasma membrane against the concentration gradient. So we're going from low concentration to high concentration. That requires energy input. Ugh. Okay, and that means that these proton pumps are going to be using ATP, converting it into ADP, and okay, so that's that. So there's kind of two ways that we can do active transport. We kind of characterize them according to where's the actual work happening. So primary active transport is moving ions. So when you think primary, think ions. This is the movement of ions across that membrane. Okay, and that is creating a charge across the membrane. And this is dependent on ATP. Without ATP, the movement of ions, primary active transport, would not happen. Okay, directly dependent on it. This is in contrast to secondary active transport that does not depend on ATP, and it's moving stuff that's powered by this electrochemical gradient. So in this example here, we have some sucrose that is being moved from the low concentration on the outside of the cell through this carrier protein into the cell where there's a higher concentration of sucrose. And so this is powered by mitochondria hydrogen pumps, or proton pumps, that allow the glucose and amino acids and some of these other things that we need to go from a low concentration to a high concentration. So the point is that this protein is moving stuff, it's using energy, but it's not moving ions, and it's not directly using ATP. And that's the big difference between primary and secondary. Primary uses ATP, it's moving ions. Secondary, not using ATP, moving other stuff that's not ions. Okay, And then we talked a little bit about carrier proteins before, but these can also be used in active transport and passive transport, so don't get that confused. But there's kind of comes in 3 different flavors, where we can have a uniporter where there's just one channel that is bringing stuff into the cell or out of the cell, but it's doing one molecule at a time, and it's going in one direction. We have another way that we can have a carrier protein is that we can have a symporter that's taking 2 different molecules and it's bringing them in the same direction. Okay, so sim means same. If you have sympathy for another person, you're feeling the same things as them, right? So sim means same. So add this to your dictionary too. So 2 different things being brought through in the same direction. And then an antiporter is having 2 different things that are being taken in opposite directions. Okay. And so in the symporter, like we might have stuff leaving the cell, we might have stuff coming into the cell, but it's the direction that matters. So that gives it the sim or the anti, where we have more than one molecule that we're moving at a time. Okay, so watch this YouTube video about the sodium potassium pump, because this is a thing that is unique to animals, and I did not learn about it when I was an undergrad because I studied plants. So so watch this. It's a pretty cute little cartoon that covers the sodium potassium pump. And so for those of you that are interested in studying medicine, this is an important thing that happens at the cellular level that you want to know about. And then in that video, they do refer to the ATP video that they made. So if you think this is cute and useful, you can use this link here to see that video about the ATP from the Amoeba sisters. Okay, we're gonna stop there and then make a whole different video about bulk transport. Okay, let me know if you guys have any more questions, and I'll see you in class on Thursday.